What if I told you America is about to split in half? Not politically, not economically, but literally, weather-wise, into two completely different worlds. And it's happening right now as I speak. I'm looking at the most dramatic weather divide I've seen in years. One side of the country is about to feel like early summer. The other side? Brutal, bone-chilling Arctic conditions that could break records. This isn't your typical weather forecast. This is something much bigger unfolding. Picture this scenario. It's next Friday afternoon. You're in Denver, and it's a beautiful 65 degrees. People are wearing shorts, maybe firing up the grill for an early barbecue. Meanwhile, just 500 miles east in Kansas, it's literally below zero, with blowing snow and conditions so harsh that travel becomes impossible. This isn't science fiction. This is what the jet stream, basically the highway in the sky that steers our weather, is setting up for us over the next week. But here's where this story gets really wild. High above the Arctic, something called a sudden stratospheric warming event is happening right now. Think of it as nature's equivalent of a bomb going off in the upper atmosphere. When this happens, it can completely disrupt what we call the polar vortex, that spinning mass of frigid air that normally stays locked up near the North Pole. When that circulation breaks down, all that Arctic air has to go somewhere. And unfortunately, that somewhere is usually straight down into the United States. Let me walk you through this weather drama as it's going to unfold, because the timeline is absolutely incredible. Right now, as I'm speaking to you, we're in this relatively quiet phase. It's like the calm before the storm, but on a massive scale. The atmosphere is literally reorganizing itself, preparing for this dramatic split. By Tuesday and Wednesday, the western United States is going to start feeling like a different season entirely. A massive ridge, think of it as a dome of high pressure, is going to build across the Rockies and West Coast. This thing is going to be so strong that it'll pump temperatures 20, even 25 degrees above normal. We're talking about February weather that feels more like April or May in many western cities. But here's the fascinating part. While the west is heating up, the east is going in the complete opposite direction. That same jet stream pattern that's creating the western heat dome is also digging a massive trough across the eastern United States. And when I say massive, I mean this thing is going to stretch from the Canadian border all the way down to Florida. This creates what meteorologists call a textbook setup for extreme weather. By Thursday and Friday, things get absolutely wild. Denver could hit 65 degrees, while places like Pittsburgh are 35 degrees below average. That's not a typo. We're literally talking about a 100-degree temperature difference across a country that's only about 2,000 miles wide. But the temperature contrast is just the beginning of this story. Remember that polar vortex disruption I mentioned? Well, by Friday and Saturday, we're going to start seeing the first effects of that atmospheric chaos. Another Alberta Clipper, that's basically a fast-moving storm system from Canada, is going to dive south into the Great Lakes and Northeast. Now, normally these Clipper systems are pretty manageable. A few inches of snow, some cold air, and then they move on. But this one is different, because it's riding the edge of that massive temperature contrast I described. When storms move from extremely warm air into extremely cold air, they can intensify rapidly. We're talking about the potential for another bomb cyclone to form off the East Coast this weekend. And with over a foot of snow already on the ground across much of New England, this could create some serious problems. The wind is going to be the story with this system. When you have such tight pressure gradients, basically when high and low pressure systems are crammed together, the wind can become dangerous. We could see blizzard conditions even without huge snow amounts, simply because of the blowing and drifting. But here's what makes this pattern truly historic. It's not going away. Most weather patterns last a few days, maybe a week if we're unlucky. But the setup we're looking at has all the characteristics of what meteorologists call a blocked pattern. When the atmosphere gets locked into these configurations, they can persist for weeks. The ridge in the west and the trough in the east are going to reinforce each other, creating a feedback loop that maintains this dramatic split. Every few days, another clipper system will dive south, bringing more snow and cold to the east. Meanwhile, the west continues to bake in unseasonable warmth. And remember that stratospheric warming event? That's still developing. If it plays out the way the models are suggesting, we could see an even more dramatic breakdown of the polar vortex by mid-February. When that happens, and I want to emphasize this is still uncertain but increasingly likely, we could see Arctic air unlike anything we've experienced in years. I'm talking about the kind of cold that makes headlines, that shuts down cities, that creates genuine emergencies. The science behind this is absolutely fascinating. The stratosphere, that layer of atmosphere about 6 to 30 miles above us, normally acts like a lid, keeping the polar vortex contained. But when sudden warming occurs up there, it's like taking the lid off a pressure cooker. All that contained Arctic air suddenly has freedom to move. The warming happens because of complex interactions between atmospheric waves, kind of like ripples in a pond, but in the sky. These waves can actually propagate upward from weather patterns down here at the surface, all the way up into the stratosphere. When they break, like ocean waves on a beach, they release enormous amounts of energy that heats up the stratospheric air. This process can literally split the polar vortex in two, or stretch it so much that pieces of it break off and wander south. It's like watching a slow-motion explosion in the sky, except the explosion takes weeks to fully develop, and its effects can last for months. The economic implications of this pattern are staggering. Energy demand is going to skyrocket in the east, while remaining unusually low in the west. We're talking about heating bills that could double or triple in some eastern cities, while western utilities might actually see decreased demand compared to normal winter levels. Transportation networks could be repeatedly disrupted. Airlines are already starting to prepare for potential widespread cancellations. The freight industry, which moves billions of dollars worth of goods across the country daily, faces significant challenges when these temperature contrasts create persistent storm tracks. Agriculture in both regions faces completely different challenges. Western farmers might be dealing with early spring conditions that could trigger premature budding in fruit trees, making them vulnerable to any late-season cold snaps. Eastern agriculture, meanwhile, faces extended periods of harsh conditions that could affect everything from livestock to stored crops. But beyond the economics and logistics, this is simply a fascinating display of atmospheric power. The atmosphere is showing us just how dramatic and rapid these changes can be. In the span of a few days, we're going from relative quiet to one of the most extreme weather patterns many of us have ever seen. The timing couldn't be more interesting. February is typically one of our most active winter weather months anyway. It's when the jet stream is naturally at its most energetic, when the temperature contrasts between north and south are at their maximum. It's also when we historically see the most significant polar vortex events. Adding this kind of artificial enhancement through the stratospheric warming makes February 2026 a month that could be remembered for decades. We're potentially looking at the kind of month that gets its own Wikipedia page, that meteorology students will study years from now. The human stories that emerge from these patterns are always the most compelling. Imagine families in Denver planning outdoor activities while their relatives just a state away are dealing with emergency heating situations. Picture the stark contrast of social media feeds. California beach photos next to Minnesota blizzard videos, all posted on the same day. Emergency management officials across the eastern United States are already preparing for what could be an extended period of challenging conditions. Warming shelters are being prepared, utility crews are being positioned, and supply chains are being adjusted to account for repeated disruptions. For those of you in the path of the Eastern Trough, the message is clear. Prepare for an extended period of harsh winter weather. This isn't a one-and-done situation. we're looking at potentially weeks of below normal temperatures and repeated snow threats. Stock up on supplies now while conditions are still manageable. Make sure your heating systems are working properly. Check on elderly neighbors who might be more vulnerable to extreme cold. Have backup plans for power outages that could last days. For those in the Western Ridge, enjoy the warmth while it lasts, but don't get too comfortable. These patterns eventually flip, and when they do, the West often ends up dealing with the opposite extreme. Use this time to prepare for the possibility that the pattern could reverse later in the season. The fascinating thing about meteorology is how these massive, seemingly chaotic systems actually follow predictable patterns. The jet stream, the polar vortex, stratospheric warming, they all interact in ways we're still learning to understand. Scientists have been studying these connections for decades, and we're getting better at predicting them. But there's still so much we don't know. Each event teaches us something new about how the atmosphere works, how these different layers interact, how changes in one part of the world can affect weather thousands of miles away. What we do understand is that when all these factors line up the way they're lining up now, the results are usually memorable. This is the kind of weather pattern that gets studied in textbooks, that defines entire winters in people's memories. And we're about to live through it in real time. We're essentially witnesses to atmospheric history in the making. The technology we have now to observe and predict these events would have seemed like magic to meteorologists just a few decades ago. Satellite imagery, computer models that can simulate the entire global atmosphere, instruments that can measure temperature and wind patterns throughout the stratosphere. It's an incredible scientific toolkit. Yet, for all our technological advancement, Mother Nature still has the ability to surprise us, to create patterns so extreme they push our understanding to its limit. So buckle up, because the next few weeks are going to be anything but boring from a weather perspective. We're about to witness one of those rare atmospheric events that reminds us just how powerful and unpredictable our planet's weather system can be. The massive winter shift is coming, and it's going to change everything. Whether you're preparing for record heat or record cold, one thing is certain. This is going to be a February none of us will ever forget. Stay safe, stay prepared, and keep watching the sky. This is weather history in the making.